This is a photograph of us in front of the laundry on the left when we were, I don't know, when I was probably 5 or 6. And that was just a regular family photograph. And on the right, and you can't read the words, I'll just explain. This is called Big Day for Tiny Jungs. Suddenly there was this one day when it became important to people in Macon to whip us out for a photo op. Madam Chiang Kai-shek was coming to town, and so they said, we need to go and find those little Chinese kids and bring them up here and take a picture of them. And they talked about what a wonderful day it was. Well, for me, I was 6 years old and I didn't have a clue what was going on. I remember it was very hot, and I did not enjoy that event at all. But what I read was it was a big day for me because my heroine was there. Why was Madam Chiang Kai-shek coming to Macon? Because she had grown up there. I know a lot of people don't know that, but that's in my book, and the details about how she got kicked out of the white school. So one day we're nobody, and the next day we're celebrities. Over it, but you know, let me just say something about Laundries. That's that old joke, you know, no ticket, no ticky, no washi, you know, sort of. Yeah, well, they also said no shirty and whatever. And the thing is, that was one of the most troublesome things, is customers would always lose those tickets. And we'd have to waste a lot of time trying to find their laundry for them, you know, unwrapping packages and rewrapping them and stuff like that. Eventually, my father identified who were the worst offenders and who lost their tickets the most and didn't give them any more tickets. So we just gave them initials. You know, this is JP and this is, you know, WG. And that's how we knew these people. Here comes WG, go get his laundry, you know. We didn't waste time finding his tickets. Now, what was interesting, what really kind of turned things around, it was kind of strange, and this has been documented like in a book that came out last year, in fact, called Chop Suey, and other places, is that in the early 1900s, when chop suey was devised or invented or concocted, a dish that most, you know, self-respecting Chinese wouldn't order or eat, that became this sort of sensation. All these people very curious about chop suey because the Chinese viceroy had come and had supposedly ordered chop suey, and so whites were curious, you know, what is this thing that these Chinese eat, this chop suey, you know, so it had some status to it. And I remember, this is analogous to, I remember when I was living in San Francisco in the 50s, we would go to North Beach where the Italians were because we wanted to look at the Beat Generation. And then people later in that, they'd go to the Haight-Ashbury because they wanted to see the, you know, the LSD generation. And so it was the same thing, you know, in the 1900s in Washington, New York, and places like that, I guess, they didn't call them yuppies then, but people like that, they were sort of saying, let's go down and slum around Chinatown. It's dangerous, it's risque, there's all kinds of terrible things down there, prostitution, gambling, opium, and there's chop suey. So let's go down there and partake, okay? So that's what got Chinese restaurants kind of in favor. So it's kind of a strange story. Well, I know you can't read these menus, so let's just skip that. You're just kind of interesting stories from old newspapers about chop suey. Here's one about chop suey won the game for the Chicago Cubs. How did this happen? The pitcher is all upset, and I guess he's not doing too well, so the catcher comes up to him and basically says something like, hey, well, after the game, let's go get some chop suey or something. And so then that calmed the pitcher down, and he went and won the game, so it made the Chicago newspaper. On the other hand, there was this thing about chop suey was a bad thing because it was bringing white women down to Chinatown, and these Chinese restaurateurs, you know, were, you know, engaging in illicit sex with these white women. So, you know, better watch out with that chop suey, you know. Now, eventually, because chop suey became so popular, you know, all these newspapers were trying to get recipes, and they couldn't find the authentic thing. They were really worried and obsessed about this. There was one newspaper article that wrote, these Chinese, they're really crafty, you know. They know how to do it, but they won't tell us the secret. You know, they won't give us the magic ingredient. So an Italian guy, I think it was, if I remember correctly, created La Choy soy sauce company and everything. And so there's this little ad there. Here's a Caucasian woman in the kitchen, and she's being guided by this ghost-like Chinese chef in the background who's kind of guiding her through how to make chop suey. And this is where she grew up in Fresno, and she hated the restaurant life. Just like Anna May Wong hated the laundry life. They all escaped, you know, to go into other things. And so the woman was kind of a rebel in her time, and so she left the restaurant and went on and became a journalist and then moved to China. This is in a book called American Paper Sun. This is a restaurant in Wichita. You can see that it's very crowded, it's very popular. There were a lot of white customers there. And once the restaurant started moving out beyond the West Coast and the East Coast, the menu also changed because maybe not so much in Wichita, but many of the restaurants did not serve much other than chop suey and chow mein and egg rolls as far as Chinese food was concerned. Everything else was hamburgers, steak, you know, corned beef hash, or, you know, American type dishes, but they were still considered Chinese restaurants. And that was true in Canada as well. What was kind of cool about Chinese restaurants is they're kind of funky in their decor. You know, they don't have this, you know, modernistic standardization. Here are a couple of restaurants that actually still exist. Like on the bottom one, there's one in Memphis, Tennessee, with a picture of the Mayflower hanging on the wall. Real Chinese, iconic image. And the one on the other side's got everything hanging there, including an American flag of some sort, Statue of Liberty. So Chinese were very improvisational. They, you know, they didn't make it fancy. I mean, what counted was the food, right? You didn't really care about the decor much. I remember when I was in San Francisco, the waiters would just come and just take the silverware and throw it at us. They didn't come and set our tables for us. They just plunk it down and, you know, you grab it yourself, which is kind of one of the nice things about Chinese restaurants. Exteriors, you know, Chinese were, again, improvisational. They didn't go and gussy it up. They just went and found a place that they could get cheap rent, and they just, you know, recycled a bank, a train station, and in Canada there's a Chinese smorgasbord. I don't know what that store used to be. It probably must have been a hardware store or something. But that's what's neat is Chinese are not franchises, although they're starting to be that way, or increasingly so. But there's still a certain Chineseness to these places. You know, once you go in there, you know you're in a Chinese restaurant. And again, you can't read this. This is a menu from New Brunswick back in probably 1940s. And there's one with Mexican and Chinese food in Texas. You know, Chinese restaurant, Tex-Mex. You know, Chinese burritos and everything. And if you look in the Midlands of the U.S., you'll find that. Here are just some images of some of the family people that I know. The two on the right are actually in Ontario, and that restaurant just recently closed. I think had the unlikely name of, I think, Sunshine Restaurant. But most Chinese restaurant names in the early days were more Chinese type names, and then they started switching to more English names like, you know, Golden Palace or Silver Dragon and that sort of thing. But there's a whole history to how the names changed and why they changed and so forth. But you can see these are families that kind of worked really hard. They worked all day. They worked 7 days a week. I think in a way their life was harder than a laundry life, because at least in laundries I think we usually had Sunday off.
Oh yeah, that's what you think.
Well, so I think the point that I want to make is, and this image comes from a photographer in San Francisco. Leland Wong is a great photographer who gave me permission to use this picture. Most of the mom and pop family restaurants are kind of, you know, being faded out. Corporations are taking over, franchises are taking over, and the food is kind of going downhill. You know, it's all kind of no longer the same. And so I wanted to talk about the people who ran these. So I was able to get 10 people who grew up in their family restaurants all over the U.S. and some in Canada. And in fact, as a personal note, I actually, in the middle of this, or actually toward the end, I suddenly realized that I have some distant relatives that I've never met who were in Saskatchewan. And I said, gee, everything I read says that in every little town in Saskatchewan is a Chinese restaurant. So I said to myself, my God, my relatives probably ran a Chinese restaurant. So after about 6 phone calls, I actually tracked down these people, and yeah, they had a Chinese restaurant in Norquest, Saskatchewan. So it's kind of personally interesting that I was able to discover that. I never really expected that would be the case. So that led me to, this is a quote from, if you've never seen this documentary, Chinese Restaurants by the Canadian filmmaker Jung. It's a brilliant tour de force, and I highly recommend it. And this is the theme that he starts out with every little vignette. He has about 15 different countries all over the world, from South Africa to Norway to Cuba to Peru, and he goes and finds a Chinese restaurant, and he talks to the people and interviews them. And what was really interesting to me was in at least half of them, the people said, when we first got to Cuba, we didn't know how to cook. But we had to do something, so we opened a restaurant. And they survived. And so that's why I think he hit it right on. I discover a personal story, a unique story of courage, survival, and hope. And I couldn't say it any better than Chopin said that. So that's sort of basically what motivated me to do this last book that I call Sweet and Sour, if I can get it to show up. And I got an image from a response from someone said, yeah, it was sweet and sour. The sweet part was we made a living, we made some money, we survived. The sour part was the long labor, the hard work, and sometimes the way we got mistreated. So this is how I came from a laundry where I didn't like being in a laundry. I didn't really understand what a laundry was about. I got involved with it, and I discovered suddenly that laundries, groceries, and restaurants have a lot in common. It's the people. It's the Chinese people. And I just want to share with a comment that I got just actually last week. A woman wrote me and said, my 4th grade son is learning about Gold Mountain and in social studies. I think it will be very interesting and informative. I'm homeschooling him. His assignment is to choose a job and about the Chinese immigrants, and he picked the Chinese laundry. And then a year ago, I got an email from some guy in North Carolina. And he said, it's amazing. He said, Southern Fried Rice. He said, that's our story. I thought he was accusing me of stealing his story. He said, we were the only Chinese in Kannapolis, North Carolina, and your laundry looked just like our laundry. And we lived above our laundry too. And he wrote to his 4 brothers and told them all that they all had to read this book. So that's why I like doing this. I've met so many Chinese people since doing this, because remember, I didn't really grow up Chinese. I mean, I grew up in Georgia, and I didn't even know I was Chinese for the longest time. And so after retiring from psychology, I've suddenly become extremely Chinese, and I've suddenly met, dozens and dozens of really interesting Chinese, and I really enjoy sharing the story with you. Thank you very much.